This year I've been doing a series of sermons in which I'm using the story of the universe as a frame of reference for understanding the 21st century. And many of the readings that I've used have been out of Thomas, Barry, and Brian Swim's universe story. Some of you know I have a universe story walk at my house, and there's a reading at each billion years. The sermon today is on the beginning of multi-cellular life about 1 billion years ago. And for me, this is always one of the most exciting. This is the one I love the most of all, maybe all of them. Thomas and Brian wrote, "The first multicellular animals were as much a surprise as the emergence of the galaxies. For more than 3 billion years on planet Earth, the primary relationships had been among cells and between cells and the inanimate elements that surrounded them." Parenthetically, Thomas and Brian gave names to first creatures. Now I know there was no CNN broadcast, and nobody, but so Argos was the name they gave to the first multicellular creature. So they wrote, "Now Argos appeared with a mind of its own, training 10,000 cells on its own particular aims. Stupendous creativity had been required for the emergence of Argos, and it now fed with ease on the individual cells, undoubtedly disrupting many great ancient communities." First of all, thank you all for coming here today, and thank you for asking me to be here again. As I said, this is a series of sermons in which I'm going through, and in billion-year intervals, the history of the universe and asking the question, so what? And now, I have made some kind of cheats. Once I say that's what I'm doing, that's not exactly what I'm doing, because first of all, the universe is 14 billion years old, and there's only 12 months in a year. So that calls for some creativity. Second of all, we know more about recent time than earlier time. And the pace has picked up, one might say. So now, starting, this is August, the rest of the sermons are actually only going to deal with the last billion years of the history of the universe. So we've changed the scale, and we're mostly focusing on planet Earth. But what this series of sermons has pushed me, first of all, I've had to think of all this stuff again, and try to get it into something that was halfway interesting to somebody like you. But I've also had to reflect on it to myself and ask, so what am I learning about this? I've been talking about this stuff for a long time. But this has pushed me to reflect. One of the things I've seen is that this story of the universe is a bit like a snail shell. That is to say, it kind of goes around, and then it comes around a little bit bigger, and then it comes around like that. Today, we're focusing on multi-cellular life. And I'll go into details some more on that. But this is not the first time that we've talked about the universe taking a step by bringing things together. The first time we talked about was early on when we talked about hydrogen bonding. This little thing and that little thing decided to stick together. Wow, big thing. Then, whoa, galaxies. Whoa, that's a big thing sticking together. Kind of loose, but sticking together. And then now multicellular life. And the key here is that the shift happened. I want to try to spend a little bit of time on what was the shift here. So life on Earth, first of all, life's a big jump, but life on Earth started quite soon after the planet stabilized at all into a planety thing. And little cells and little cells and little cells. And then clumps of little cells. And then like coral reefs. Imagine coral reefs and things like that. Now, all of life, we still haven't gotten life out of the sea. That's coming up in a couple of months. Stay tuned. In the ocean. I'm not going to go why it was hard to get out of the ocean today, but in the oceans. But all of that conglomerates of like cells was onesies and figuring out how to kind of habitat together. But everybody was sort of the same. Or else they had enemies, but they had common enemies. And some cells started to eat other little cells. But it was all onesies. And there was, I don't know how one cell whistles at another cell, but that happens. I mean, there's communication between the cells. Hey, we're moving towards the light. Oh, no, like this way. And we had photosynthesis and all that stuff. But one time in Argos, a bunch of cells got an insight that came from the middle. It was not Johnny cell told Sally cell something. It's the cells realized that the idea came from the middle, or it came from the group of cells. This is different. This is not Orrin telling me something. This is Orrin and I having an idea. And this is radically different. And this is what happens in your brain. Where does an idea come from? Do you have a smart cell up there that that's the better one? No, that's not how it works. It's not like anyway you have one. There's one really smart cell. Your brain comes up with an idea. Where? From what? That's the magic. I'll come to why this is so important in the 21st century later on. So I tried to think of where it's hard to see. This is a hard thing to see. But my one little example, the dog that I had before we had Tony, his name was Perdue. Some of you know, he's a golden lab. He traveled with golden retriever, she said. Okay, golden retriever. He traveled with us hither and yon, And excuse me, I have to make sure it's still running. He traveled with us hither and yon. And one day we were at a bed and breakfast. And this bed and breakfast was up on the Appalachians somewhere. And and they had a dog too. And they said, oh, your dog's welcome, and they can run around together. So the two dogs ran around and they played, I'll chase you, you chase me kind of a thing. And then they got tired and they laid down out in the middle of the grass. And I was watching the two dogs out there in the middle of the grass. And there was a pond, kind of a biggerish pond, and two ducks flew in and landed on the grass between the dogs and the pond. And I was watching this scene play out. And it was like you could see the dogs get an idea. Now, if you watched, the dogs, they didn't move. There was no sound. They weren't looking at each other, but you could see that an idea had come up in the middle of those two dogs. And you watched the scene play out. They laid there for quite some time, and the ducks were waddling around. And then, just about simultaneously, the two dogs got up like they both decided they needed to go to the bathroom or something. Kind of nonchalantly, they got up. And they started walking nonchalantly. But you could see what was going to happen. And all of a sudden, they shot after the ducks. And of course, the ducks got to the pond. But you could see an idea come in the middle of those two dogs. I think it's that kind. That's what I'm trying to point to. That must have happened some time ago in a bunch of cells, and they realized, I am more than a collection of onesies and twosies. So this is a radical change in the way the universe functions. Because somehow or another, in life forms, the concept of an idea that allows motivity towards common action became self-consciously present on the planet. And this is an amazing step. It's hard to imagine what it would have been like to have been the first. What would it have been like to be one of those first cells laying there? You knew what your neighbor on the other side was doing. You knew how periodically you might bump into each other. Oops, sorry. But an idea came. An idea came, and they did something. And the second kind of reflection on that is, what about cells who decided they didn't want to participate in this group idea? Well, I think I'm just going to fend for myself. Well, that's okay. And the first little while, that probably was okay. But pretty soon, however many cells you had over here working together, that becomes a force to be reckoned with. And that's how you and I got here. Thanks to some group of cells that figured out how to make that work. Now, why? So I want to focus on that and ask myself, why is that relevant today? What about that today? Well, I've said before, and I've been trying to say almost every time, I try to say something like, we are on a cusp of history on planet Earth. And I believe we are on the part of the cusp of history that we're on. And frankly, all the times that I've said that, I'm talking about the same cusp. Yeah, I'm trying to talk about it in different ways, maybe. Somebody can go back and try to figure out what all I've said, but it's all the same. the cusp of history that we are on now is like from single-celled to multi-celled, but now it's from single human to multi-human. That is to say, we are now at a time when the human community has the capacity for acting in groups in the same way that the single cells had the capacity for acting as single cells, acting as a group of cells. We are now beginning to experience consciousness in the midst of a group. And that is a new possibility for the planet at a scale that the planet has never known that before. And it's not just bigger groups. It's not just like a bigger army. And there's a difference between an army with a general and 10 commanders and like this, groups of 10 coming down, and the top guy says we're going that way, and this guy says he tells these two, and these two tell those two, and those two tell those two. And there's a difference between that and a group of people like this getting an idea. We're going to go serve pancakes on Saturday morning. And it's not that Craig tells us we're going to go. The group gets the idea, oh, we're going to do pancakes. Now, you can ask Craig to make sure the box of pancake mix gets there. But the group gets an idea. It's a different kind of thing. And this kind of multi-humanness consciousness, you start to sense it in small groups. And now the question is taking that to scale. I'll come back around this again in a minute. But in small groups, the number of times, you notice it oftentimes in marriage or in a place where you're really close to one or two people. Because to have an idea come up in the middle, it's not an accident. It takes some work. I'll finish that thought in a minute too. But in a marriage, you're real close to somebody. You've been around them a lot. But the number of times that Elaine and I will be sitting at the dinner table, and I'll say something like, we got a meeting tomorrow night at downtown, and she'll say, I was just thinking about that. How many times does that happen? Like it wasn't that the thought train was going along like that. It's like the thought came. The other one that gets me is the number of times when I think to myself, I need to come on in. I need to call Elaine. And I call, and she'll say, I just walked in the door. It's like if I'd have called 5 minutes earlier, she wouldn't have been home. The number of times that happens is different than random chance. It happens in other cases too. Last Friday morning, I had a breakfast appointment with a guy. And he and I have had breakfast together and worked together on a lot of odds and ends of things. It was raining Friday morning. And I went into the breakfast place, and I realized I left my cell phone in the car. Well, okay, whatever. I don't use my cell phone that much anyway. And the meeting time for breakfast passed. And then I had a thought, I better go get my cell phone. The guy might have called me. And I went out to the car, and when I picked up my cell phone, it said, you just missed a call 30 seconds ago. So I decided to go get the phone at the same time that he called me. Now, you can say, well, look, I'm saying there's something going on here. There's something going on that we need to pay attention to that has to do with how thoughts and decisions come up in the middle that is not directly involved in me saying something to you or passing you a message in some kind of way, that's direct communication. You know, I wink at you or something like that. That's it. I'm talking about something different than that. And we need to pay attention to it. And this whole shift, this sensitivity to something going on in the middle, it's beyond what's affected by social media. Those social media and the ability to have Facebook friends all over the world, and I get, that's direct messaging. You know, I get so-and-so waved at you or something like that. But because we have so many more people like that we're in direct contact with, this other dimension is heightened, I think. So now, for me, the big question is if the direction of the universe, I'm passionate about the fact that it's possible to say the direction of the universe is this. That's important, and I think it's possible. The direction of the universe is moving towards increased complexity. The direction of the universe is moving towards increased complexity. And increased complexity is little parts of particles flying all around to a hydrogen atom going like this with an electron and a neutron in the middle, whichever one it is. Increased complexity is going from that to stars, to cells, to planetary systems, to human beings, to groups of human beings, to groups of human beings. Now, that is terrifying. It's really terrifying. It's a threat to some people to think that there are groups that have power, because I want power, me. And it's okay if you have power and he has power, then I'll fight it out or we'll parse it out. But when you start to think about a group having power, that becomes a whole different, that's a whole different thing. And it's frightening to people. Like I said, I wonder about the day when the first group of cells started to work together. What about those onesie cells? We're gonna go punch their bubble or something, or try to split them apart, or it would be scary. But many people today, and this is, I think, a big part of what's going on in our political discourse today, that we are trying to figure out how groups of people work together. And one model is a strong person will tell us what to do. Now, frankly, that's the easy solution, because I just do what somebody else told me to do, and I don't have to make any decisions. And it's much more complicated to be a part of a group that the group is making decisions and you're a part of it. That's more complicated. It's also a bit spooky. I like my little thing about Elaine and I coming up with the same idea at the same time. Don't you get a little spooked when that happens? It's like, whoa, how did that happen? Maybe she's reading my mind. Wonder what else she knows. Oops. Being a part of a group when a thought happens, sometimes I say when the magic happens, it's really kind of magical when a group of people working together on a project and they thought this is never going to succeed, and then it does succeed. last weekend. I wasn't here last Sunday, apologize. But there was 9 of us, and we had a little workshop. And everybody knew that the workshop was my idea, and most people didn't think it would happen. And then it did happen. And the whole, it was kind of, there was a bit of a, wow, this is pretty impressive. Because something happened in the middle. It got beyond one person's idea and another person's idea. It's a kind of magic. And that's an important part of what happens when a group when a group begins to function together and gets beyond onesie, there becomes a kind of, there's a magic. There's a level of consciousness. And we need today, as we move forward into the 21st century, it behooves people like you and I to practice, to work on that. This is not something that happens accidentally. It is not something that happens in the normal course of events if everybody's trying to be their best self. And it's not something that we really know how to do. There's a lot of things that the human race really knows how to do. We know how to make fire, you know. We know how to do a lot of stuff. But how to get an idea in the middle of the group. That's the only way I know to talk about it. Part of the problem is we don't really have good language here for a group coming to an idea. We're pretty good at a group agreeing with somebody else. But a group getting an idea is still a fresh thing. There are some guidelines that I think we can learn about. First of all, everybody has to pay real close attention to what's going on. I was part of a small committee of 3 people that were supposed to make decisions about some financial decisions about health care for a large group. And we were the health care committee. And the 3 of us had quite different backgrounds and quite different, actually, language skills and everything. We were different, really different. And what we learned was that we had to be able to see each other when the question was asked of us. One time we had our meeting, and then we went to report to the whole group, and they asked us a new question, but the 3 of us were sitting side by side. And we said, we can't answer your question. We have to rearrange our chairs. But we have to be able to see each other, because it's not that we winked at each other or anything like that, but there was a kind of energy in the middle. And then we would know then we would know. And that's how we worked for several years, the 3 of us worked. But you have to pay attention. And you have to, and the other thing is, you have to know yourself. That is, you see, you have to be willing to say, well, the way I see it is this. And you have to be honest about that. Because otherwise, you're just doing what somebody else says. And the point of this is to find out what's in the middle. But what's in the middle depends on what's on the edges. So you have to know yourself and be willing to actively contribute. A group cannot make a decision. That thing we read, that thing about councils. First, I don't know where they got that men walking on the ceiling. But anyway. But the thing about the councils is that everybody has to speak, nobody more than twice, and nobody less than once. That was an interesting insight. Everybody has to speak. We lived in Australia with 6 Aboriginal girls, and these girls, their parent, I mean, they lived up in Wyndham, and they were amazing. But and there was about like 6 or 8 white people, two ordained ministers and their wives. So, and when we'd have a meeting to decide what to do about anything, so there'd be 6 Aboriginal girls and these other 6 white people. And the 6 white people, on and on, forever. And then we'd say, okay, now Heather, what do you think? Well, and almost whatever Heather said, you could count on that was going to be the best answer. She would only say one thing. But there was a kind of wisdom. You kind of learned. How did she do that? That was amazing. Everybody has to contribute. And so there's some guidelines for this. This is not completely magic, but we are at a time, an edge of history, where learning how to tap the wisdom of the group is critically important. And that is the next big gift to the planet. And it's covenanted groups. For me, one of the exciting things about this group that says it's a covenanted group is that covenant is an important part of this, what it takes to make a decision. Because you have to agree that you're a part of the group enough to want to find out what the wisdom of that group is. You have to agree to be part of the group so that you can find out, be a part of something that's trying to have some wisdom. And when you're a part of a covenanted group like this, it's not just, we're not here to just make each of us better. Now I'm real interested in each of you becoming better. That's fine. But that's not the point of this. The point of this is to have something that is a group in history that we're all proud of. To be a something. Otherwise, we'd all be just a better. So this kind of covenant is important I wanted to read, here, let me read. There's a little line in here about holding this community as a precious gift and nurturing its well-being. That's an important part of this. This community in and of itself is important, and that's important. Elaine and I were a part of a self-consciously covenanted community for years and years, and I learned a lot of stuff about covenant. It's not trivial. One little piece of covenant has to do with when it comes time to leave a covenanted community. And that happens sometimes. Somebody has to leave for one reason or another, oftentimes genuine. The covenant community that Elaine and I were a part of, we had what we called a send-out ritual. Like we have a come-in ritual. So Elaine and I joined this community last week, 2 weeks ago or something. So we have a come-in ritual. What if we had a come-out ritual also, where the community acknowledges that it's going to be diminished, and the people, whatever is going out, acknowledges they're going to lose something, but that it's not out of anger, spite, and malice. It's a next step for everybody. It's for the covenanted community's well-being. Those are important things. It's also important within a covenanted community to understand that the power of the community is in the center of the table. Now, you have to have, to be organized, you have to have somebody that's the chairman of the board. And you have to have some committees. And you have to know who's the committees. But that's not a power play. That's an organizational function. It's like in my body. I mean, my fingers pick up food. My feet walk down the road. We don't try. My hands don't try to walk down the road. My feet don't try to pick up food. It's okay. But the power is in the me. And it's the same way within a covenanted community. There have to be responsibilities, but the power is in the center. And then we can ask, and I want to focus more on this question next year, if I get a chance to do a set of sermons next year. What I want to focus on is, what are the individual skills that allow us to be an effective member of a covenanted community? That's an interesting other question. What does it take to be a part of a group that is about being greater than the sum of the individual parts? And I mentioned some of those. How do we learn to pay attention to what's really being said? Not just words. How do we allow ourselves to be willing to understand that I'm not the center of the universe? Things can happen, and even if it doesn't go my way, it's okay. There's a whole set of what does it mean, and that for me is another next big question. Once we understand what the task is to develop a community of people who understand that a thought, that wisdom, that direction, that consciousness lies in the center. And then ask, how now do I make that an effective demonstration for the planet? That's where we are in the course of history. The planet has made this shift once before at a smaller level, and it's now making it at the human level. And you and I have the chance to participate in that, and that's the task that I look forward to working with you on. Now,